Okay, hello, and welcome to surprise first special installment of Dissensus, the show where we don't have to agree and we don't have to agree to disagree, but also we don't necessarily have to get into verbal fisticuffs over things. We can just talk about stuff like intelligent adults. My first guest on Dissensus is the delightful Christine Brophy, who I'm going to allow to introduce herself so that she can give you the lowdown on like stumbling through a script on this. It's the summer. I'm sort of on vacation, so you know how it is. Okay, so I'm going to pass over and allow Christine to introduce herself. I'm assuming if you're on my channel, you know who I am. Maybe I shouldn't assume that. I'm Anderson Todd. Okay, now go to my channel. Okay, here we go. Hello, Christine.
Hello. I haven't been asked to introduce myself in a long time, so I don't even know where to ground it. I guess so. I mean, right now, like I am a psychology / game design person, and I have specifically been using that skill set to try and help teenagers to map out what they're going to do with their life.
Nice, amazing. So I think that is a worthy set of goals, obviously. Yeah. And as you know, I also have some fingers in the using games to help young people solve issues, grow as people, et cetera, et cetera. So, so the way that we have this, I guess, broadly set up, how do we have this set up? We've decided to go with a lightly structured conversational form of conversation. This is going to need so much editing.
Remember the low bar of lack of perfection. That's what.
Yes, we're just, that's right. Lack of perfection. We're satisfying
today.
We're satisfying people. We're not following into the Faustian bargain of maximization. Okay. Okay. So how do we want to do this?
Okay. Well, I mean, so initially we thought that I would just tell you kind of what's been on my mind, something I want to talk about.
Sure.
And we're just going to go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
So, I mean, I guess this is going to sound a little bit morbid, but it's actually not. So you can hold your horses there. But I did want to talk about this whole idea of the importance of play and imagination. But there's been this kind of, I guess, context in which it's become relevant. And that I think it applies to multiple contexts. And I kind of want to just explore all of those. I guess to ground the importance of play and imagination in the face of death. And death not just being the physical death of someone that you love or care about, but it can also be the death of a dream or a goal that you've pursued for the long term. Mm-hmm. But also in the face, I think, of on the political landscape, what happens is that ideas start out in the current context, and then they age, and then they become ideologies. And then you get this battling of ideologies and ideas that are no longer helpful for the individuals that are living. And that's kind of like the death of the archetypal father.
You're talking about the walking death of our entire civilization?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good.
And the importance of play and imagination to kind of break out of this sort of spiral towards death that society is feeling, and with some of the current political issues, but even on the personal landscape of engaging in conversations with people and kind of breaking out of your archetypal or the ideological sort of narrative or script writing that we kind of engage in to kind of cover new ground. And that just became important for me just because of a recent interaction that I had when I was in Niagara Falls, and I was meeting a couple new girls, and they were fantastic individuals, so driven. And I was like, oh, these are people I definitely want to be friends with. And they were giving off a few signals that I was I found my brain suddenly being oh, you're on that political spectrum. And suddenly the moment that you kind of enter into that rational brain of how you're judging them against your own norm, I guess, it just, you stop sort of engaging in interesting conversation. You stop asking questions of why, and being curious, and which allows you to kind of break down those sort of that ideological thinking. And instead you're just being polite, and then conversation sort of stops and you walk away.
Yeah, you're tiptoeing in case there are landmines.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just it's not very interesting, and you end up missing an opportunity of forming a relationship. So
Right. Okay.
um
Well, wow, that's marvelously apropos for what we're doing then. So the fact that thanks Niagara Falls once again, but
yeah.
that does seem very apropos. Not that this is, not that I had primarily in mind a political conversation, although if it goes there, it goes there. But
Mhm.
um, but yes, the being able to have a conversation without the landmines seems like a very productive thing to do. So
Yeah.
okay, good.
Yeah.
Um, so just to roll this. No, wait, sorry, I'll let you continue.
No, I mean, that's basically like we don't, that was just kind of like a link that I guess that I found this morning
Yeah.
when I was thinking about this stuff. But yeah, just the general topic of yeah, bringing about life in the face of death and the
Mm.
importance of play and imagination in that. And yeah, whichever one of those areas we want to talk about that we find
Mm-hmm.
interesting is kind of, yeah.
It's interesting that you bring up the kind of the archetypal father, I think, in this link. When I think about play, I mean, obviously, I got enough sort of whatever neo-Jungian framing in the way that I tend to frame things that sort of links. Like play is really important, right, to me, right? I think it's um, not just central; it's a completely the seeking circuit. I'm borrowing Panksepp thing. The
Yeah.
seeking circuit gets lots of attention, right? People are very keen on the seeking circuit and so on. But the play circuit, which is it's not the same thing, I think is actually in some ways more important for learning, more important for growth, more important for avoiding the kind of sclerotic inflexibility that you're describing, like keeping things loose, to say nothing of keeping things fun, keeping relationships healthy. Like I just think play is so central. And when I think about play, it's hard for me not to think about it in neo-Jungian terms. So you get the Jungian breakdown between the puer and the senex. And here we go. Get the puer and the senex, right? And so the puer, or the female version, I think is the puerella. The puer is like the eternal child, the Peter Pan, right? The senex is the old man. It's Saturn and bitterness and get off my lawn. And these are sort of like, when we talk about somebody being, an old soul, we mean typically that their personality is showing a little more senex, or like, right? Puer is very concerned with play, but it's not very grounded, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, it's Peter Pan, right? It never touches the ground. Senex is more like Captain Hook. And
Mhm.
Captain Hook, of course, who chases around Captain Hook? The crocodile with a clock in it that got a
Yeah.
taste of him and never lets him go. And it's like, oh, right. That does explain a few. And you sort of get the sense in that story, right, that maybe Captain Hook was kind of a Peter Pan type himself before he got locked into the rat
That's,
race,
oh my
the
gosh.
pirate rat race.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I don't want to get too off track, but
Mm.
that's so interesting that you say that, because I often wonder how it is. Like, I mean, you see that like some of these hardline stances that we take, it's because of an experience that you ran into in a hard lesson that you had to learn, where something that you did got you into trouble, or something like it's like a wall that you ran up against. And that's how you form like an important experience and lesson that then you then want to like, pass on to the next generations.
Impose a lot of the time.
Impose, yeah. And
Impose.
I'm sure that we're going to be doing the same thing,
Oh,
like
yeah.
by us doing this, it's the exact same thing. But it's so funny that you say that about Captain Hook, because yeah, when you hear an adult who's kind of saying one of those hardline lessons of that, it often makes you wonder. It's like, hey, you probably were the Peter Pan when you were
Mm-hmm.
younger. Yeah, that's so funny.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you're mentioning when I say impose, right? I think about this a lot, because the problems that we successfully solve, I mean, we in the high level one successfully solves, it seems to me are often the problems about which people become most intolerant and inflexible and discompassionate.
Mhm.
And I think it's because they have this insider view that says this problem is solvable. I know I have proof because I solved it. And also, I solved it in this way. So there is a way to solve it. You just have to do it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is this kind of like, it's this graveyard of excluded things argument. Like do you know what I mean? If I mean the Department of War Math?
No.
Oh my God.
No, I don't know.
Woo, we're going off into the weeds. It's fine. I'll loop it back around, I swear. Okay. The Department of War Math. The Department of, it's not really called that, but in World War II, there was this department of mathematicians and statisticians and stuff that worked for the Allies. And they were there to solve certain kinds of like relatively complex mathematical problems of various kinds. So one of the problems that they faced was bombers being shot down in runs over Axis territory, right?
Okay.
And so they had this problem. They were like, we want to make sure fewer bombers get shot down. So we want to put armor on the planes, right? But armor is heavy and planes need to fly, and also you're going to put bombs and stuff in there. So, right, you want to keep it light, but also armor it. So they get all these photos of, right, they take all these photos of all the planes that have come back, right? And they look at the bullet patterns, right?
Yeah.
Forensically. And then
they
do a statistical analysis to figure out where are the planes getting shot up the most.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, that's where we should armor. Yeah. And then somebody in the Department of War Math basically shows up and says, no, you have this completely backwards, right? Right? You have this completely backwards. And this is one of these moments where the human brain, it's counterintuitive a little bit. And you can really feel like the irrationality of your basic processes twisting. You don't want to armor that. You want to armor everywhere that there aren't bullet holes. And the reason, right? And the reason is those planes didn't come back.
Oh, that's funny.
Right. So this is the thing, right? All of the examples that you have are examples that it's survivorship bias, right? Those are these examples that actually came back, but those are the ones that actually came back. Whatever, let them, I mean, obviously don't let them shoot there all day long, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's fine. You can get shot there and still get home. But if you get shot here, well, we don't have any planes where you get shot here. What's under there? Oh, the explosion tank. Whatever. Okay, so there's some survivorship bias there. Yeah. And it's the same thing. People who have solved a problem for themselves successfully, a difficult problem, often become quite tyrannical about their solution and unforgiving, because they're like, this problem can be solved. You just have to do it.
Oh, I love this. Okay, so this is making me think of, there's two things that's making me think of right now. One is like, the idea that, so again, with this idea that you develop a lesson that comes from an experience that you had, and it was like a hard fought lesson that your wisdom that you had to learn. So you come up with the solution. And then that's the thing that you kind of tyrannically sort of hold, you can grow to hold it tyrannically over others. That there is the context in which this came up in that you're not necessarily aware of. And that context can be all the things that you, the habits that you inherently have, the kind of traits that you have, the strengths that you have, that you're doing a whole bunch of stuff that you haven't taken into account. That means that you're clearing up a whole bunch of uncertainty that then you don't have to like consciously order or deal with. So the lesson that you're passing on doesn't take that stuff into consideration. Now, something that the book that I'm reading by Norman Doidge that he talks about when he talks about Words with Power. Is this one?
Words with Power is Northrop Frye.
Northrop Frye. Oh my gosh, that's the one that Northrop Frye. Oh.
Don't get me wrong. I'd love to read Norman Doidge's Words with Power. That's fine. They're both ends. They're kind of around Toronto. That's fine. I had one like that the other day. What was it? I was just stuck on it. And my brain kept saying Thomas over and over again. I was like, not Thomas. Like, that's a funny phenomenon.
Oh yeah, I know.
Comes in and it's like, I know that this isn't it. So you can know
like, no, that Thomas, it is Thomas.
Yeah, Thomas. No, we went over this. Anyway. Okay, yeah. So Northrop Frye, Words with Power. That's the one about the Bible, right?
Yes, I'm so happy that you're here because my brain's not working with names right now. So Northrop Frye, Words with Power. And he talks about the importance of imagination and the prophetic elements of the Bible, that what it is like when you're kind of cueing into that unconscious voice, that you are you're able to describe without even knowing it the social context in which certain actions and things came up or grew up in. And when you bring that into like a voice, that it ends up being what needs to happen in the future, or that it indicates action that has to happen in the future in the other direction that you need to go. So this idea of the planes that didn't come back, that it's like, that's the context that wasn't taken into consideration, and that's why you need to armor that area. But it's bringing that voice up, and that's what comes with play and imagination, that you're giving voice to the thing that we're not taking into consideration, that was part of the context that's relevant.
Play is concerned at some level with the impossible and the non-existent,
Mhm.
right? Like that's sort of but it's half non-existent, because
Yeah.
the thing is that play is like this, right? When I talk about play, I often talk about the as not. I have no idea where I picked up this term. Did I borrow it from somebody? Is it my idea? I don't know. If somebody out there
It
knows,
sounds,
somebody out
I'm
there knows,
intrigued.
I'm pre-copying to plagiarism / looking for a reference. So yeah, so I always call it the as not function. And the thing about it is, right, it has that dual nature. Like if you look at kittens or puppies or something playing, they're fighting, but they're not fighting.
Mhm.
If
Yeah,
you
yeah,
look
yeah.
at, so it's bisociative in this way. If you look at the classic game of chase a toddler around, what do you do in that game, right? You pretend to be scary and pretend to be chasing, but you're not really chasing. And the odds, right? You'll get the occasional kid who just like freaks out, especially if you look like I do. But see, this is one of the benefits of not having a beard. You didn't think about this, but it's helping. There are in fact some studies that show that kids with beards are kids with beards kids with beards they get picked on. Kids with beards, you'd think they would get more, that they'd be considered wise anyway.
Yeah.
So kids don't like beards or clowns, but that's a whole separate comp.
That's a whole separate issue.
So anyway, when you chase a kid around like this, what are you doing? Well, you're threatening them and not threatening them. And play comes in this way. There's a really good bit in the Michael Apter book, Reversal Theory, which I think is a terrific book. I'm a big fan of Apter. And that bit, which I stumbled across shortly after I got into miniatures and doing miniatures, talks about dolls and doll houses and the pleasure of the small. And when he gets into it, he's like, what's the deal with the small? Well, the answer is it's the thing and yet not the thing. And like a dollhouse it's going to get me in trouble. But anyway, this is Moloch, but it's off the cover of the first edition. It's a first edition Player's Handbook of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. For
Fantastic.
a bunch of you, I have just triggered your confirmation bias about the hobby, but I assure you it's not satanic, not in the way that you think anyway. So point being, he has this whole bit on doll houses. And what is the interesting bit of the dollhouse? It's this like verisimilitude to reality, right? And the drawers open. And look, it has little curtains and this kind of thing, right? Same thing. If you've ever seen Marwen Call, that documentary, did you ever see that?
No.
Christine, you got to watch Marwen Call.
Okay, I'll write it down.
Watch Marwen Call. Seriously.
Marwen Call. Yeah. Okay.
I don't. Do you still have login stuff for U of T?
Yes.
Okay, so I think you can get access if you're current with the library. I think you can get access to a streaming thing. I'll send you a link.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, because that's what I do with my classes when I make them watch it.
Perfect.
Okay, so briefly, right? Marwen Call is the story of this guy, Mark Hogenkamp, who had his head kicked in basically in the year 2000. He got jumped coming out of a bar, badly beaten, brain damage, had more or less identity loss, and he gets his 6 weeks of Medicare funded therapy and is still a mess. He can't draw anymore. He used to be able to draw, and now he doesn't have the motor coordination. And so he sort of knows he needs to do something to continue his work. And so he decides on a course of self-therapy, which consists of building a 1/16th scale World War II era Belgian town in his backyard, populated by dolls and under continuous assault by Nazis. It has some cat fights. There's a bar, there's a church, there's a witch that lives there, but mostly it's just soldiers.
Wait a second. Sorry, keep backtracking. What was it? What happened to him? What was the injury?
So he got badly beaten, and he sustained quite serious brain insult that kicked his head.
Wow.
Like a lot.
So he built a town that was being attacked by Nazis.
You really have to see the documentary. Okay. I'm framing it and setting it up, but if you see it, it's astounding. Okay. It's astounding partly because these vignettes that he creates with these dolls, which he photos, he takes all these Polaroids. These vignettes are not like this gets pointed at in the documentary, but there's a guy who said, normally when you see artistic work that involves dolls, it's done with a fairly heavy cushion of irony. right? There's irony wrapping. It's like, oh, look, it's Barbie at the
Mm.
mall, but she's shopping for skulls or whatever. I just made that up, but that sounds like a pretty good art piece. So
Yeah.
that's it. I'm back in Nuit Blanche. No, so I'll call it transgressing the boundaries. Um, no, it doesn't have any of that irony. He sets up these scenes and they're just, if you Google it, if you Google Marwin Call, okay, just
Yeah.
Marwin Call, you'll see some of these shots of this guy's work. And it's just, there's no irony. It looks like life. It looks like shots from life. It's remarkable. And he's very clearly projecting himself in
Yeah,
to it.
yeah,
He
yeah.
has a doll, people he knows has dolls. His doll forms a relationship with another doll, and it's pretty clear he thinks he has a relationship with that person in life.
Hmm.
Now, this is part of the way play functions anyway, right? So like, so a story that I tell sometimes in class is I remember the day my toys stopped working,
Hmm.
right? I was maybe 11, and it was the last time that I can remember, or it was maybe the first time I remember taking out like my toys, like my action figures and that kind of stuff, and setting them up around the couch in the way that one does
Yeah.
when they play with this kind of thing, but it didn't work. It wasn't working. I was acutely aware of this. Like, it's not working. And I took it immediately at the time as like a cold, like a chilling moment. Uh-oh,
Hmm.
I'm growing up. Now, what was it that didn't work? Well, what didn't work was this spontaneous projective capacity. The toys weren't telling me a story anymore, right? They weren't doing their
Yeah.
own thing. It wasn't like they were happening, like, because when we did this as kids, when we played in this way as kids, we were absorbed into it in such a way as that clearly there was something projective going on, right? And we
Yeah.
know this because when we do play therapy with kids, it's the same kind of thing. We look for the stories that the things tell, not because the kid is attempting in a wink wink fashion to convey something to us, but because we understand that it'll unconsciously work itself through into this narrative. Mark Hogenkamp is projected in a way that most adults aren't projected with these dolls.
Yeah.
Now, how the hell did I get to Marwin Call?
No,
Play?
so yeah, that's what I was just trying to loop it back around to, because I was trying to
Yeah.
remember what it was, because there's something that you're onto right here.
Mhm.
But it was,
Oh,
go ahead. No, go for it.
I was going to say, so wait a minute. Okay. There was the graveyard of planes. There was people solving their own problems, taking that to be the case. Oh, we were talking about the general virtues of play. Play, it's a training space, but it's also this as not. Things are and are not the thing that they are. Like, they're simultaneously the thing and not the thing.
Yeah.
Tickling is
Oh,
another example.
maybe
Right?
it was this that, like, so maybe I'm just taking this in a direction that I wanted to take,
Mm.
but it's because this is something I've been thinking about when it comes to play, that it's not just something that's like internal to you, like even like pulling back on the idea of the Peter Pan thing, which is that people kind of get concerned about with play, that it's just that it's just like an egocentric sort of process where somebody's just going to perpetually be in that imaginative space and never accomplish anything, or that it
Wasting
doesn't have,
time.
yeah, wasting time, that it doesn't have a point that's external to you.
Yeah.
And this idea of the toys no longer speaking to you, and that there's like this kind of like projective component of like a conversation between you and the environment, that is then sort of drawing the story forward. And then this whole like is and is not thing, all these things sort of tied together to that idea that there is about with God and the spirit, that you've got like one in the many, that it's simultaneously both those things, but that when you engage in this sort of the imaginative space or the unconscious sort of space, and bring that voice to life, that the path that you're going to follow is one that will, if you're just looking at the path like from these instances, will seem like it's conflicting and irrational, or like with God speaking to you in the Old Testament, that his voice is just like, it seems like an irrational human, and that it's not that there is no unity to it, but that when you do follow that path and listen to these conflicting voices and engage in that conflict or a conversation with nature, that the path that you're then following is one that leads to like a heroic life, or a unified sort of life. But it is that point at which your imagination and play actually engages with the world in a productive way, but you need to leave the space for that imaginative piece to exist.
Yeah. So yeah, totally. So we sort of permit play below a certain age, and then past a point, we begin to basically treat it as a vice or a reward.
Yeah.
Right. Despite the fact that play, very obviously, if you look at the animal kingdom, you look at humans, is how we optimally learn. Right. It's
Yeah.
pretty clear, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If it weren't, there would be just no reason for so many organisms to engage in it. Right. And the smarter the organism, broadly construed, who's to say how smart we are as organisms, but the smarter the organism, the more play it tends to engage in. Right. And it contains, counterfactuals, right? You can play with the subjunctive. You can, right? Obviously, right? Humans excel at maintaining sort of imaginative spaces that aren't what's actually going on in front of them. And that's how you conceptualize, really, of having, the future past narrative bound together and all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
I'm not even going to go on the one and the many. I swear I'm not yet going to get into psychodynamics. I'm certainly not going to touch on the alchemical, but there are links in both of those directions. So sticking an alchemical pen.
Perfect.
Because to be honest, actually, I think that this stuff is deeply alchemical, and I've spoken about that, but not yet. So, so we frown on it. Now it's time for work. Even, and this is one we've talked about before, but I find it very puzzling how often people say a good marriage is hard work. They say just like that, just like a slightly frog with a cold or something. But good marriage is hard work, right? People say. Now, first off, it is not the same thing to say work as to say effort. One can put a lot of effort into play. Trust me, you can put a lot of effort into play.
You would know.
Yeah, you can put a lot of effort into play, certainly. So what does this mean? A good marriage is hard work. I remember thinking about this. I went through a period where my main attempt to generate insights was to assume that the minority wasn't always right, but the majority was always wrong. So any commonly assumed piece of folk wisdom, I should just reverse and see and test that and see what I thought, right? So a good marriage is hard work is one of those. And I thought, is a good marriage hard work? It seems to me that if marriage has become a state of work, right? Nothing but extrinsic goals and no intrinsic goals.
Yeah.
It's in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
Right? And do relationships start through hard work? No, that's stupid. Relationships start through hard play. You start a relationship, what do? You do all this fun stuff. You go out to meals and you visit new places and you go see movies and you chat and you have sex and you do, right? You do all this fun stuff.
Yeah.
You don't certainly engage in hard work. That is not, right? So, right, and this is clearly what we choose to do with friends too.
Yeah.
Right? It's play. And yet play has this weird moral character to it where we really urge people away from it because it's considered to be a waste of time.
There's something though I think that's so different about, and I think it's important to differentiate between the waste of time or the delusional space that you can enter into, or the state of non-action that you can enter into that people are so afraid of when you think of imagination. But it's very different than play. Play has an active component to it where you're trying to engage others in the game with you. And when you have to do that, it draws you outside of yourself, where you have to come up with an idea that captivates others, that hits on something that is greater than oneself, versus when you're just engaging in a state of just purely imagination in your head, where you come up with an idea or all the other potential things that you could have possibly done in a certain scenario, or all the things that you don't like based on something in how it could have been different, but you're never actually doing the active piece of that, which is going and trying something out, trying on a different role. Then you don't get that piece that's external to your own mind and your own rationality, really, which is completely antithetical to imagination and play.
So I don't know, I might slice that a little finer, actually, possibly. Okay. Well, and so I said I wasn't going to get into psychodynamics, but here we go. So, I'm not inclined to think of an individual as individuals, right? My position is that we're creatures of parts. So yes, I think you're right. There is something about play that is, right, it's play fighting, it's playing a game, it's right, those early forms of unstructured play, especially with kids, where just like three kids who happen to live in a neighborhood wind up in an area with some trees, and one of them picks up a stick, and all of a sudden you got something going.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and that's a thing. And a thing that I think most people can kind of think back to, often with great fondness.
Yeah.
Right? You could be absorbed for hours with that stick and them, and we're running around, and like, what's happening there? There are no clearly defined rules. People might impose them, and that's definitely a thing. But I think that because we are divisible, because we're creatures of parts, and the psychodynamic, I mean, granted, play is one of those psychodynamic aspects, in my opinion, but we can also play with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's one of these things, like, if you slip and fall on ice in public, what's your reaction?
It depends. I mean,
yeah, okay, fair enough. Oh, my eggs. No, but like, you know, you're not hurt. You're just embarrassed. What's your reaction?
I mean, I'll try it. Like, if people are watching, you just like, you make a joke out of it. Like, I'll make an even bigger deal of it, like in a joking way.
Right.
Yeah.
You laugh.
Yeah.
You've already taken the hit. And so the only thing to do is laugh. This is partly for their benefit, but also a large part of it is for your own benefit. It's because it's funny.
Yeah.
Right. And in general, I don't know, you know, I know lots of people are weird about admitting that they talk to themselves, or that they talk to themselves in the mirror, but I certainly do quite a lot, right? And sometimes I will find myself, if I'm by myself puttering around, I'm engaged in a kind of game with myself. Like, I'm talking in roles, I'm doing stuff, I'm thinking. It's like, it's imaginative space, but also there's clearly some interaction happening in my head, right? So now, granted, that it may be the case that that serves as the scaffold and the practice for the external, right? That there's a transjective, you do inner, because that's sort of how I think it works. And then that maps to the outer, and so on and so forth. Because there's negative versions of that space, right?
Yeah.
Arguing with ghosts, where you're practicing an argument with somebody, is not play.
or like defending your position, like narrating what you're doing in order just to kind of justify your position, sort of.
Right, being a chess master.
Yeah,
and then
yes.
they'll say, and then I'll say, and then they'll say, and then I'll say, and then they'll say, and then I'll say. And it's like, you calculate the odds of this train, it's not going to go that way. And if it does, you'll be so spooked out, you'll tell everybody and they won't believe you. And it happened exactly like I imagined. And yet we all do that. Makes no sense.
Yeah. The kind of chess that you believe that you can play with somebody just by entering into a social situation. And then if I say this, they're going to react this way. But then so what would you say then, just to kind of figure out what the difference is here? Do you, when you're having those kinds of imaginative play, episodes, or going through that stuff in your own mind, are you, does the person that you're speaking with, or the other voice that you're speaking with, take on like an archetypal role? Is it like, do they have like a certain voice or personality to them and how do you select? I'm also just kind of curious, is there a certain reason why you'd select a certain type of person that you'd be speaking with?
Oof. Okay, that's toughy. So it's possible that I will admit that it's possible that my own relationship to this and style to it may be atypical. I had an unusual set of circumstances, I think, growing up in some ways that, they put a lot of emphasis on my doing this kind of thing, right? And it was further emphasized by doing writing and playing role-playing games and this sort of thing, where planning for those sorts of activities often involved doing sort of dry run rehearsal-y things in my mind. So for me, it's very strong, sometimes too strong. Actually, I was up north 3 days ago, and I sort of, I ate an edible, which turned out to be stronger than I expected, which was fine. It was not unpleasant, but it sort of like pulled the lid off the peanut butter jar. And for the next 2 days, my mind was in nonstop storytelling mode. People couldn't say anything without my brain immediately spinning it into a story. And a story with exotic components and stuff. And so there's pieces of my mind that are just doing that, obviously, all the time. Normally when I'm engaged in this kind of thing, it depends. Like, I can remember being on a long motorcycle trip when I was 16 or 17, and realizing at some point that the sort of conversation I was hearing between this like Texan cowboy type and this English gentleman was not in my head. I was speaking out loud in the helmet. But they were having this long back and forth conversation, which I was merely listening to,
Oh,
right? As they talked about it. And then I was like, wait, my mouth is going. Like,
it's a good thing that you were on a motorcycle during that.
Yeah. Well, I was paying attention to driving. I didn't have time to be talking to these people, but I could listen. So, so it's like that. I wouldn't call that a conscious selection. Sometimes it's channeled. Sometimes these sorts of scenes and things and conversations and stuff are coming about specifically in relation to some other creative project or process. So if I'm working on things that are narrative, it's not uncommon for characters and scenes and stuff to sweep in. And sometimes that comes to me propositionally, right?
Okay.
It's just that it's like, oh, it would be cool if XYZ fact.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it comes in like dialogue. Like people will start talking, like I'll hear it. And so that isn't precisely something that I've selected usually. And sometimes I can narrow that aperture and be like, no, we're working on this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so that I don't have a bunch of competing lines, but I don't know how much of it is. I can sort of turn it off if I have to, right? Like if I really need to pay attention to what's going on. And I can open it up if I need to. So it's very useful if you're doing improvisational storytelling, like role playing. Okay. Right, where I have to come up with fairly elaborate details sometimes on the fly and do storytelling on the fly, and a character who I may never have considered ever is just suddenly and on the fly. So you can sort of open it up in that way, but most of the time it's just sort of bubbling up, and the thing that seems to make the difference is just how relaxed I am.
That's so interesting. See, I never get dialogues like that. Just like the only thing that comes to mind for me is just like the practice in DBT of like the speaking with the sage, or calling upon the sage, where you just like, you think of like what a wise person would say to you in that moment. I think that's like a pretty good description of it.
Right. Like the Solomon paradox.
Yeah. Solomon paradox. You want to describe that?
The Solomon paradox. Who was that? I think that's Igor Grossman's work at Waterloo. So the Solomon paradox, I'm going to mangle this, but basically, if you ask somebody to solve a kind of, a complex question or whatever, and typically with an ethical dimension, they will do so far more easily if the experience is framed in third-person terms rather than first-person terms. And so and it's that simple of a modification. If you present a question to somebody that's like, a man's teenage daughter wants to go out on a date, but the clothing she's wearing is somewhat revealing. Whatever, people will answer quite differently in the third person than if it suddenly becomes first person. Your daughter wants to go on a date, and people will answer in a much more, right? It's a little like a trolley problem in that sense.
So, so this is interesting because this is this ties in with something that from one of the jobs, one of the projects that I'm working on, where the gentleman, he was describing to me a way that's more effective of asking a teenager, asking a kid what it is that they want to do in the future with their life, and like that. When you're asking them in the first person, like in more like that question, like, what do you want to do in 5 years? It's like, but if you start off with more like, and imagine this, you're X years old, and then you paint the scenario where you're using where it turns out you're using third person language, that it's a lot easier for them to actually give a response in that like when you use third person language, and for them
when
to
you
like
distance
think of themselves. When you distance it, so that they can, maybe that's it. Maybe that's, so I was like, I didn't know why in the moment that worked.
Are you familiar with the stuff around self-regulation by third person? Have we talked about that before?
No.
Okay, interesting little experiment. So people are bad at saving money.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Yes.
Speaking of, let me show you what just came in the mail. But people are bad at saving money, and people are aware of the importance of saving money for retirement, right? So you could do this thing. You can take people and you can show them, give them your 2-minute PowerPoint deck about the awesome power of compound interest and why they ought to be putting money aside, and how that will and they'll say yes, and you'll say, so are you saving money? And they'll say, oh no. And then you can give them the presentation and you say, so are you saving money now? A little later, and they'll say, certainly not. They're like, but you recognize the rational importance of doing so.
Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, yes. But are you? No. Right. However, if you switch the game, if instead you have them not treat an identity relationship with the person in the future, right? So the thing is, they did a little bit of drilling, and shocker, it turns out that North Americans on whom this study was originally done, hate old people, right? This should not be surprising. Our culture glorifies youth. Right? Glorifies it. It fears and hates age and death. You can see it in our media exclusions.
Wait a second. Did this study, was it like a comparative study where it was like North Americans compared to other cultures? They
did other cultures, because there are some cultures that don't suffer from these problems to the same extent. And interestingly, those cultures often have their language, their grammar around time words is different and more continuous, and we'll get to that in a second.
Interesting. Okay.
So anyway, the point is, people, look, we live in, pretty much the first culture in history where old people know less than young people. Right?
Yeah.
Right. This is once we pass the event horizon of having to show grandma how to program the VCR. Right. Then it's been this thing where it's like young people are contemptuous of the old. Speaking as a middle-aged man, I could see the whole battlefield. So young people are contemptuous of the old, right? And the old people are considered don't have relevance. They're considered to, yada yada. It's very historical, but also people's ideas about old people are like, oh, they're old, they're sad, they're sexless, they're right. Thinking of yourself as an older version is often a miserable idea for people. Never mind that the numbers don't support that. But old people have a ton of sex. Sexually transmitted infection is highest in the demographic in nursing homes.
Really?
Right?
I thought that was just a fable, or like that was made like popular by like a TV show or something.
No. They're it's frisky business down at Golden Pines. So so there's that. In fact, if you know about the hedonic U, right? Late life tends to be, depends, right? Women tend to level out, men split. So some men get better, and a lot of men, there's a real fork in that road. So if you're male, you may want to consider taking a look at that. But anyway, the point is, people don't want to be old. They hate the old version of themselves. So what they did was they switched to the third person, and they said, okay, I want you to consider your future self. Imagine your future self as an older person who needs you to take care of them.
Yeah.
That caused people to save money. They could third person and look at that future self as a person. So that's one of these cases where you don't want to fuse your identity in order to get the required result. If you fuse your identity, the result that you get is fear and revulsion and avoidance.
Yeah.
You want distance.
That's really
so this is there's an axis here someplace, right? There's an axis of absorption, immersion, identity, the extent to which you identify, right? That's clearly tweakable. And as with most things, my suspicion is it has different utilities depending on where you're going in that spectrum, right? But that's a clear case where actually pulling back, and what you're describing sounds like the same thing.
It's interesting. There's just one thing that just kind of popped into my head. I think there was a study that was done by Panksepp, but I could be muffing that or messing it up. But
we'll fix it in post.
Yeah, exactly. It was about people who've gone through traumatic experiences, and they what they noticed is that the way how they would describe them, or how they would describe themselves, that in order for them, so people who describe themselves using like I and like first person language, and that they're very compelling and they're very interesting and fun people to be around. That was like one of the findings. But then if you go through a traumatic experience, if you stay within the realm of describing yourself as I, and you describe the experience through the first person, that you kind of remain locked in that experience, and your life sort of dies and becomes much worse. But then they go through this cognitive flip where they begin to describe the experience in the third person. person. And then they're able, and then if you flip back into the agentic one, that those are the people that transformed and that were able to go on to have new life. So this just I just kind of remembered that. And it's a very cool study. And I think like we'll have to dig and try and find.
Yeah, we gotta find that. I need to read it. I'm not familiar with that study, but intuitively, not that that's the best guide necessarily, but intuitively that does make sense to me. I mean, this is part of the. Do you remember talking about the this bee I have in my bonnet about the free will axis business? You remember this?
Go for it. No.
Okay, whatever. This is brief. My theory, the basics is this. It's like, look, people often complain that they want to feel more agency, more free will, more meaning, right? These sorts of things. They treat it as like a thing that you can't get enough of. And that to me is strange. Like it's just not true, I think. Yeah. Right? So take meaning for a second. Now, first off, as I'll say, anybody who's ever had like a serious, like, wow, that was a handful of mushrooms kind of experience will know that the next day, you don't want anything to mean anything. You don't want that. You don't want it. You don't want your shoes to talk to you. You don't want to see the face of Jesus in your oatmeal. You just want objects to be themselves. You want them to sit there, be dumb, mute, explicable, predictable, opaque objects, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a case where it's like, you know what? I'm good. I had enough meaning. Which is why it's always like a little hilarious to me when people are like, aren't you worried about getting hooked on LSD? It's like, no,
they have an experience the day after.
Yeah, no, I'm good, I think, although people of course do form psychological, which is interesting in its own right. But anyway, okay. So there are other cases of this though, right? So, for instance, if you go to a family meal and your great aunt Hilda is there, your fond great aunt Hilda, remember the time that you spent with her at the orchard? Those were good days. Anyway, and then in the middle of the meal, she's like, suddenly starts spouting like really strong, obscene, aggressive profanity at you, personal profanity. Okay, in that case, you do not want to hear that this is meaningful and emerging from her agency. You want to hear Aunt Hilda as a robot. You want to get, you don't want to. It's not like you're like, yay, Aunt Hilda has brain cancer. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is like, what you want is for her behavior to be meaningless. It doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean anything. It's just that she had this thing and it's pressing on her thalamus or whatever. That's what you want. It's the same thing with depression. If I get a client coming in for depression, one of the first things I always do is I say, have you had your thyroid checked? Because if your thyroid is out of whack, it may be the case that you can take a simple medication and this will clear right up, which is basically a way of saying, this is a case where it would be great if you were a robot, because that's an easy situation to solve. Because if it's not your thyroid, then odds are we're going to be doing some much deeper and more tangled work as we try to figure out what it is that isn't sustaining you. Like, why is your life not functioning, right? So I talk about this access because I'm like, the thing, as far as I can tell, is people get a weird commitment to sliding into a fixed position. And as far as I can tell, what you want is flexibility and phase function fit. You want to be able to move that slider of construal depending on what the circumstances are. There are circumstances where you want things not to mean, and there are circumstances where you want them to be more transparent, more significatory, more, right? More charged, more laden, and to feel more connected agentically. Well, I think this might be the same kind of thing. There are cases where you want to be identified with yourself and cases where you don't. Where it's easier to step outside.
Or at least like that for in some instances where it's like it's temporarily necessary in order for you to integrate something. Going back to the idea of like psychodynamics and the parts and stuff like that, where you need to temporarily step outside yourself in order to resurrect the thing that you have lost, or like a voice perhaps that you have lost, in order to bring new life back, like to tie that back into your narrative and bring new life into the world, so that you don't just die on the single axiom that you were living according to before.
Right. Even if it's something that was hard won, just to loop it back around, right?
Yeah.
This is the like you've made the whatever journey to the underworld or something. You grabbed your, oh yeah, now I know how to solve this problem. Go back. Then you proceed to shake that thing at everybody that has the same problem, and also you get so sclerotically attached to your precious.
Yeah.
You can't ever, and it's like, yep, that was treasure, but now it's causing you a problem.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Right?
It's this is only tangentially related. It's related to the core of what we're talking about, but it's tangentially related to just something that you just spoke of, about aging.
This is a safe, abstract, random space. Go wherever your heart takes you.
Thank you. The being contemptuous of the old and of aging. And this is just something that I know that I've personally struggled with, I guess, but it's mostly been watching people who are dying of different ailments and watching them as their brain function sort of starts to decline, but even being around people who've gone through incredibly traumatic experiences where they've lost somebody that they've loved, and that has an impact on the frontal lobe function as well. But watching somebody decline from the person that they were, and especially if they're a person that you respect and an authority figure that you respect, to see them kind of go into a different state where they're not functioning at the same capacity, that the kind of visceral reaction that you have to that, or that I have grappled with and struggled with, is like kind of like I don't want to have anything, I can't, and you just want to distance yourself because you're not the same thing that you were before. And I guess it's also kind of like a feeling about human limitation and like frailty. And this is just like another thought that just popped in my head, is the idea that again, like with these sort of axioms of truth that you hear from authority figures, that you take them as you're growing up to be the ultimate truths. And then to see the person who said those things with such confidence sort of, disintegrate in some way, hear them then say truths with the same sort of conviction and force, but now suddenly you can see the context in which they're living in and in which they're existing in, which is like their sickness or anything. And then the things that they hold as being the most important in life, that they're saying them with the same conviction. To watch that happen is like, it shakes up the world a little bit for you. It's it's very unsettling on like a fundamental level. And then you kind of just want to like distance yourself immediately from it. But again, going back to like this idea of play and imagination and how to engage in those spaces, when you have to kind of shut off your rational mind of like the things that or your expectations of how those interactions are supposed to go, and how you are I don't know if this would but like that you said like time words was more continuous, and I wrote that down because I wanted to pry into that with you. But when you try to connect together the things that they are saying with things that they said before to make like a continuous sort of temporal line, that's when you become judgmental and angry with them. And but versus engaging in this sort of like mindful state of like, you forget all that stuff, and then you just let whatever thoughts sort of pop into your head based on the new things that they're saying, whatever kind of like strikes you and inspires you, that the idea that you want to speak about, if you follow that instead of the voice of the comparative sort of judgment and things like that, that you can cover new ground with them and form a new relationship with them that allows that passing to be meaningful, I guess. Yeah.
There are three. So my paternal grandmother died in the end of brain cancer. She was pretty delusional, irrational, no longer connected by the end. Like, we brought her to visit, brought her over to visit for Christmas. I remember her quite clearly describing to me in hush hush tones how they were keeping her locked in the cargo hold of a ship and trying to feed her poisoned fish. And she was telling me this with great earnestness and terror. And I thought, oh, fuck. Like, oh my God, right? Like, that is not what's happening. So what's happening for you? Like, right? Really terrifying. And I didn't know, I would have been 13 maybe or so. And I didn't know how, 12 maybe. I just didn't, like, what does one say?
Yeah.
right? I'm sure that probably played some role into my career choices eventually. My high school girlfriend's mom, likewise, died of brain cancer, unfortunately, and so that was when I was like 17, and she likewise, by turns, she became quite nasty. She could become quite nasty, but
Yeah.
also, she just sort of wasn't making sense, and or she was contradictory in various ways, and like it's unsettling. It's oh, there but for the grace of God go I, but also with enough footsteps there go I regardless. And right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah.
it's like the confrontation with that, there's the grieving part, there's like you're always dealing with that disintegration
Mm-hmm.
in space and time and the world and people. It's just that usually it's replaced with something, right? So something falls apart, but something else emerges.
Yeah.
And there's a pain there. I mean, you and I were talking about a little bit before about this doesn't sound like it's connected, but it is. Having restaurants you like go to business,
Yeah.
which a lot has happened. I understand that's hardly the worst thing that happened during our global pandemic, but it's like, oh, that restaurant that I liked went under. I once
Mhm.
went into a restaurant that I really liked, the Franz up at Eglinton, and I super wanted a piece of pie. And I
Yeah.
walked in and she was like putting glassware in a box. And I was like, oh, she's like, sorry, like we're closed. I was like, oh, sorry. Geez, I was coming to get a piece of pecan pie. And she was like, you should have thought of that 3 months ago. I understand. She wasn't having a great day.
Yeah, no
Um,
kidding.
she wasn't having a great day. But the point is, right, there is like a pang that comes, your
Yeah.
old school gets torn down, right. I'm old enough now that I've begun to really understand this kind of like the disintegration nostalgia,
Yeah.
right? When the Rogers tanked themselves last Friday, I went back to a small town world of cash, and I missed it.
Yeah.
I had missed it. I was like, oh yeah, cash.
Can you say your joke just one more
Oh
time?
yeah, sure. Well, so I was interacting with cashiers. This is, Rogers is down across the whole country, and they're like, yeah, I don't know. At first, it seemed like it was a thing, but now I don't know. It's just central. I said, oh yeah, come on. I think we know what it is. Roger just tripped over the cord. Oh, geez, the internet's unplugged. Mm.
Thank you.
Anyway, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, that kind of the disintegration is occurring, right? It's occurring. People change, and that's a thing, and that can be problematic too. If you go through a radical change, your social network often does not absorb it well, even if it's a change for the positive. People don't know how to behave, they don't know how to react. They're used to maybe having you in a particular kind of like subaltern position, or they're used to you being in a certain role or status position that can disrupt a family and so on and so forth. But so that stuff is always disintegrating. But usually it's
A child growing up and the parents, the way how you
yeah,
interact with your parents, same
right,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
And parents behave variously well at different stages, right? Everybody always says there's no manual. That's a half truth. But I get
There's
the
one
point.
that's forming.
Yeah, it's like, yes, there's no manual, but there are certain common sense things, in my opinion. I know common sense is a stupid idea, but anyway, the point is people behave variously well, right? And there are usually some difficulties in transition for everybody as the kid stops being one thing and starts being something else. That continues in adulthood. Parents have to recalibrate with young adults because, like, what is the relationship now? To what extent should you still be guarding or advising or taking a I know best sort of position versus having a position that, while not a friendship in the sense of not being the strict exchange of philea, nevertheless has a more equal, right, has that respect component. To circle this back around to your friend that, right, was asking about the question of authority, right? And how does one get authority? And
Oh
the answer
yeah.
is, right, you can
Oh,
get
maybe I'll
authority.
just maybe a little background, because I don't think that anybody
Was
knows
that
it.
before record? Okay.
That was before record. Yeah. It was just one of my friends I was speaking with who entered into a new job, and they had a role that had authority, but yet that doesn't translate to your interpersonal interactions. So they were kind of like a little bit jarred, or they realized that, in order to have authority in conversations, it's going to take something more than just a title. And the way that you go about that is consistent messaging. I mean, your messaging needs needs to be, part of it is also like you've recognized a pattern, and the older truths that people have been operating on, or understandings of patterns and the way how things play out, is no longer working. And you are now predicting that something is going to happen. And then when you're right multiple times and you have consistent messaging over that, that is like, that's the grounded authority of consistent messaging, and not just propaganda. But
consistent messaging, where also messaging is consistent with behavior, is how you create trust, predictable patterns. I mean, it's authority does not necessarily carry respect, and people want it to. Lots of people want it to in a variety of contexts. I am in such and such position, ergo you must respect me. I am your parent, I am your teacher, I am your elder, I am your male, right? I am your priest, I am your whatever. All these various things where it's like, look, there's a difference between an authority position and a respect position. And people say, you have to give respect to get respect. And that's sort of true. I mean, it's sort of true. But the point is, you really do, like, respect actually has to be earned and constructed out of trust and so on and so forth. Like it can't be granted typically above the baseline level of respect that we would think.
There's a baseline level, but then there's authority, which comes with like good leadership or things like that. And a piece of that is like the confidence of the individual, but then also their vision being grounded in the reality of like that moment, or multiple moments across time, that they have like some further seeing vision.
Something
and perspective,
something in the longer range, something coherent, something you can go like, right? Right. And you see it in action, that it's not just gum slapping. So the state of disintegration is constant, and people are always having to deal with it. I think the difference with grieving in a certain way is that the pattern stops being replaced, or it seems that it is. I mean, this is the thing. This is the thing that sort of wisdom points sometimes try to get at, right? They're like, there's a tree in the forest that can only sprout its seeds after a forest fire. I'm trying to link this to whatever crisis you're having. Like, right? And that kind of thing. Or, it's brightest just before, no, it's darkest just before the dawn. This is, of course, not true. That doesn't make any sense. It's darkest just before it begins to lighten up. But that's not the dawn. Anyway, whatever. The dawn's when it breaks the horizon, I thought. It's definitely not the darkest right before the dawn. Sorry, whoever came up with that. Probably Shakespeare. Could have been Tolstoy. We don't know. Solzhenitsyn. Okay, so that space, that grieving space of watching somebody. So you're reading Words of Power, right?
I was just going to say though, like it's something that seems to be irreplaceable. That holds like a bigger space in your life, that's integrated in more ways. Whether that is like a human being who has been like very closely integrated in so many aspects of your experiences, or what we were talking about a few days ago, which was like your kind of like apocalyptic sort of sense of environmental struggles and things like that. So something that's so integrated in your life that it seems irreplaceable. That is the grieving space.
So when you're done Words of Power. No, you haven't read Anatomy of Criticism, right?
No, not yet. This is my first.
Okay. This is the first. This is Fry 1. Okay.
This is Fry 1.
when you're done Words of Power, is Words of Power the second Bible book or the first? There's two.
Second one. It's the second one.
Because the first one's called
The Great Code.
Thanks. My brain was saying The Great and Secret Show, and I was like, no, dude, that's a Clive Barker novel.
The Great and Secret Show.
I love that novel. Well, I like the start of it, but The Great and Secret Show. That would have been a good title for it. But anyway, the Great Code. Okay, the Great Code's very cool too. The Great Words of Power is good. The Great Code is good. When you finally get into it, read Anatomy of Criticism, because actually Anatomy of Criticism, one of the things that it touches on is the kind of the seasonal circularity of modes of storytelling and modes of culture.
Oh,
So
wow.
this like, right, spring, summer, winter, or spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, and how there are specific cultural modes attached to
Mm.
this. I think in some sense drawing on like a little bit on maybe Egon Spengler, right? The decline and fall of the Roman Empire,
Oh, yeah.
right? The idea of like looking at decline and organismic whatever, but also as just this general sort of level of archetypal analysis that can be brought in. And what we're talking about when we're talking about this at any scale is this like transition from fall into winter,
Mm-hmm.
and the fear that winter will be followed with no spring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always kind of what it comes to, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
winter will be followed with no spring. You watching the leaves, right? And there's this like late summer quality that's so wonderful, right? The trees are at their maximum fullness and power. Everything is in growth, and it's not sticky with dew, but nor is it, right? It's not pollinating anymore, but it's also not something, and it's not the harvest. There's like an enormous late August kind of like power,
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful phase for our culture, I suspect,
Mm-hmm.
and a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful phase for human being, or for the cycle of anything, a movement, an idea, or something. But then
Yeah.
inevitably you get fall, and fall is like the powers aren't as strong in the same dimensions. But you think about a political fall, right? Political autumn, although
Mm-hmm.
that's a good double association. Political autumn is like we're past the prime of our glory and whatever, but we still have some of the like the virtues of age. We're a little more seasoned and salty and
Yeah.
hardened,
Yeah.
and right,
Yeah.
things start getting a little bit more like back channel and political. We don't have a shared story anymore, right? It's like autumnal. It's sort of its fading grandeur, and
Yeah.
you're right at the precipice.
Yeah.
So anyway, the reason that I like Fry's analysis is that he does a really good job of grounding out in types of stories and specificity of sort of dramatic movement and stuff, this thing, which connects up with, right, Spengler's ideas about these cycles of history.
Yeah.
Or Toynbee talks in similar sorts of terms, the historian Toynbee talks in similar kinds of terms about these sort of cyclical ideas in history. And I think that we're all freaked out by the intimation of the winter chill,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's sort of where I go with it, which is like talking to somebody who is approaching winter is like,
Yeah.
yeah, right, winter.
Yeah. And watching that happen, I mean, even watching people when they speak about ideas that they've developed, that they've like written about over years, and you watch the life cycle of an academic, for example,
Mm-hmm.
when they're first starting out and they have like a wide range of ideas, and then part of the aspect is that you start to talk about a few ideas and they become incredibly well developed, so that you can then argue the oppositional point to whatever the like authority is at that time, so you can become strong enough to sort of battle in the space of reason or in the space of debate. But then, because you watch this happen, that they reach a point of irrelevance, that like where their philosophy then is, just putting
What,
too much attention onto like a
what do you mean
specific.
I became the problematic tyrant?
um,
Away from me, my theory is perfected, young fools.
yeah.
Don't worry, he can't sit on that throne forever. Yeah.
There you go, exactly. Or well, I think right now sometimes of like when I think of this, I'm just thinking of like adults right now. um Maybe this is a bit of a contentious issue, but I like when I think about the whole issue surrounding identity politics and the battle that's going on right now, and you just hear like left wing and right wing views. And I just think that like what needs to happen is a little bit less attention needs to be given to it, a little bit space for people to have a little bit more ambiguity and sort of explore and play once again with these ideas. Because I know when my husband and I enter into arguments, that like if we take too hard of a stance on things too early, that we're right, and then you start arguing over it, our positions become more and more ideological and combative. And suddenly you're paying attention to every aspect of that person's life that runs counter to your ideology that you've suddenly adopted. And the more that
fundamentally incompatible.
exactly. And the more that you argue about those things, the more like anxiety and detail and further detail that you just want to pick apart every little aspect. And I just think of like the way how identity politics has like just caused this insane battlefield that and the kind of terminology that people are having to like try and figure out and navigate, that I think like a little bit more space and a little bit less attention by the adults might do us all some good.
I tend to agree, with a few, I guess with a few procedural caveats, which is that 100%, I couldn't agree more, that entering into a space of like a little bit more undecided ambiguity would be fine, right? It would be fine. That would be good, wouldn't it? Right, but that doesn't, as you know, altogether better than I do, since like you've done research in this area. This is just something I smack talk about. But like, not everybody is equally able to do this. Or like it causes, let's say this, it causes a very different anxiety response in people with high versus low openness for ye old big five, ocean or canoe, you take your pick.
Yeah.
Ocean canoe. It causes a very different reaction. And for some people, right, ambiguity and open-endedness and whatever are fun. The idea of a mystery or a riddle or a wow, we'll never know the answer is fun. And for other people, that is not fun. They don't like it. It's irritating. It's sort of vaguely frightening and anxious making. And so ambiguity, absolutely. I think that's the way forward. And I think play is actually the way that this works, right? Play is precisely how this, right? What you need is more play to get into that. Like, does everything have to be decided?
It's a little bit of play just to kind of like, let's just push back the force of like, definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as far as identity politics, we got to be careful. We don't want to, we don't want to go. We don't want to open a can of sandworms is what, but I will say this, the focal point around identity actually strikes me as very interesting in a few dimensions. One, because I actually think that it is not a left issue as it is often portrayed. It's something that has in fact become integral to both sides of what I think of as, let's be honest, I think of it as a puerile political distinction, left versus right. Oh, I'm not wearing my anarchy shirt. Oh, well. Anyway, but I think that the distinction is a bizarre, oversimplified, it's not sufficiently multidimensional. But leaving that aside, identity is very clearly has become this bizarro central piece on both sides. And maybe that's unavoidable in politics to some extent, right? Some amount of identification. But the difference is that, for one thing, on some aspects, right, of the political spectrum, you've got things like opposition to scientific process as part of an identity piece, right? So for instance, climate change has become an identity component. That is not the kind of thing you do not want to associate the outcome of like empirical fact, I think, with identity components, but people do. And it's not just that. I mean, you don't even, there are a dozen other things that have become absolute battlefields where it's like, well, not everything is actually especially suited to empirical solution. But, in other things, like we should pay attention to the rolling bar of evidence. People super want to cherry pick all their evidence. That's one. And then two, of course, is the splintering. And this splintering is occurring on both sides of this spectrum, right? So the identity splintering, which is, this is what gets typically shorthanded as witch hunt, right? Where there is a rolling bar of moral standards, right? Which are increasingly fine-grained, and which one is supposed to know about whether or not they have had the time to learn and internalize them, right? So there's like a shaming element. And this operates everywhere. It's not left or right as much as people can tell. So in the left, wow, I think I'm opening the can. On the left, when I came up in the world,
I made it a slit, and then now we're just gonna rip it off.
Whatever. Look, this is supposed to be a safe space. This isn't like we're not saying that we're middle of the ground. We can be honest, whatever. But like shit, we got to talk about stuff. So on the left, when I was coming up, I ever tell you kids about the 90s. On the left, when I was coming up, right, the left was still pretty focally oriented on the class struggle. That being the sort of original thing, the class struggle. Class is an organizing principle that's useful because, insofar as, I'm not saying it's the only lens, but it's a lens that's useful because it creates a, relatively speaking, firm division within social strata, right? You have the people who own the capital. We should come up with a word for that. Anyway, and then you have the bourgeoisie,
Yeah.
The bourgeoisie, the bourgeois, and then you have, right, the proletariat. And
Yeah.
that's a useful distinction because it's basically it's haves and have nots. It's not that hard to figure out. There is a small number of people who own the shit and make money thereby, and that money
Mhm.
is an ever increasing fund. And then there's a larger group, and the identification is a simple one. It's like, we are a bigger group, and so we want a better deal.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So to shift that over to a more identity
They were,
politics driven thing is a
yeah.
splintering rather than an agglomerating, because nobody is allowed to have sort of a full access in some sense to anybody else. Your own intersectionality is a very narrow slice, and it's presumed that you cannot, in a certain sense, mind sight your way into other, you can't know. You can't know, you can't know. It's very
Yeah.
specific, you can't adopt and you can't know. I find this puzzling, not just because obviously I think human beings have much more in common than they have different between
Yeah.
each other, but because, like, I don't know, mind sight's not that hard. Like, I can figure out what a dog wants. It's way more, like, and if I could do that, why can't I figure out, not perfectly, but we're all operating off the same emotional framework. We have
That's,
lots of,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's, I don't want to get too far into it because I don't, but I do know that, like, the idea that we are operating off the same emotional framework, I think that sometimes when we associate problems to being related, I think that we need to take a finer tooth comb to the stuff that we are saying that is due to racial differences or other types of differences that are all based on these different identity categories that have become further and further differentiated. And I think that we need to reincorporate this piece, which is like, okay, but what parts of this is actually just like human emotional reaction to, like, having taken a stance on something, and then when somebody says that you're wrong, then you getting off on your heels about that, and
sure.
Nobody liking to be in that moment of being said, being told that they're wrong, and that it has nothing to do with the two races in the room or anything like that, and it's just a matter of, like, a human reaction. That, so, like,
Yeah.
the greater differentiation needs to, like, we're understanding certain experiences through a single lens, and I think that we need to bring in that's the lens that ties us together as humans, that will make situations more relatable so that we can understand each other again, as opposed to just, like, being in isolated cylinders of experience.
Yeah, so I tend to agree. I mean, look, obviously it's the case, right, that certain of the aspects about which is deep concern are real things that require real attention. Right? No question, right? Like, anybody that thinks that there's no racism, it's like out to fucking lunch. I don't know what they're thinking about. Anybody that thinks there's no sexism may have been asleep for the last month. And, like, it seems pretty obvious to me, right? Like, this is not, it's not really contestable. And I find it very strange when people flip their shit and are like, of course there's no advantage to being whatever. It's like, whoa, slow down. I'm not trying to invalidate your efforts. You can still make efforts. That's fine, right? It's like, and you should continue, right? But no room for fortune. Our culture has exiled fortune which is, I think, a disaster. It's a moral disaster to excise fortune from your concept of the world. So everybody has the bizarre, fundamental attribution error thing that somehow everything they got, they earned. Right? Like, I'm a self-made man. It's like, really? Did you invent the language you said those words with? Did you create the economic system in which you're operating? Like, what do you mean you're a self-made man? Shut up. That's not how it works. That doesn't mean that you didn't put in tough efforts. And it's important that doesn't, right?
That has no value. But the fact that you didn't inherit gifts, or even just your physical strengths that you have, if you don't approach the world with the equal oppositional force of understanding, which is that you can simultaneously have agency in the world, as well as believe that you've been given, that to treat the things that you've been given as gifts, to see if you've got a religious bent, that it's like God's grace,
providence.
Exactly, having an openness to those chance circumstances that seem to bring you good fortune, right. That you need to hold both, that you don't just slice one off, and it's not just one of those things.
I mean, look, it seems to me, and that's exactly what I mean, right? Is what you're saying. Like, there's a moral dimension to it. First off, imagining that the poor are unfortunates, which is the term that we used to use, is a recognition that, like, yeah, we live in a big casino. It's possible to roll the dice, and that's not a moral fault, right? And rolling, I guess you don't roll, pulling the one-eyed bandit handle and getting triple cherries is not a moral virtue, so far as we can tell, unless you're part of one of the late Protestant trains that believes that God rewards hard work, kind of, sort of, because it's a theological tangle, right?
Yeah.
If I'm rich, God must love me, right? Never mind that. Never mind what Jesus said. It's what was that? It's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven.
And there's also the last will come first and the first will come last, I think.
Oh yeah, that's the meek will inherit the earth. That's the Sermon on the Mount, right?
Yeah. And then, yeah.
So the point, I mean, this is a guy whose thing was programmatic homelessness and giving away everything you own for radical egalitarianism. You don't see that typically expressed in the actual religious organizations around it. But leaving that aside, the thing is, it's like fortune. It plays a thing, and you can have a sense of your own good fortune in terms of the abilities you have received and the positioning you have received, right? What's your starting place and what did you get to work with, right? You can have a sense of pride, I think, in the development of those abilities. Like I used to think about intelligence. My family was one of those families that put like a preeminent, almost exhausting level of emphasis on the importance of intelligence, right? Not that it was like we had to like do flashcards before we could get dinner or something. It wasn't like that, but just that intelligent and smart and stuff were these very high terms in my family, and this has created some neurotic issues. But when I was a kid, I took that as a given. Yeah, of course, the best is to be smart, right? Of course. Then later, right, and going with that, you're never supposed to say that anybody is smarter than anybody else. You're not supposed to do it.
Yeah.
Right. You're maybe allowed to do it if you fracture along Gardner's multiple intelligences line, and then there's 9 lines. It's hard to even tell who's ahead, right? Unless you add them back up, and then you've got a score, right? Having a score, right?
Yeah.
You're not supposed to say it. It's rude. Okay. Then, as a teenager, I was like, "This is stupid. Like, this is not a moral quality. Intelligence is not a moral quality, right?" I'll be honest. I think on an IQ test, I outperform most people. And also, I'm tall.
It's a tool. It's a tool in a toolbox. You get a set of tools.
And and I mean, granted, all the issues and cultural specificity, all that horseshit around right IQ tests and even Raven's matrices for that matter. But it's a thing. It's like I can get the highest pickles off the shelf. Right? Being tall is useful in that social sense. I can get high pickles off the shelves. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe I can talk to some other people about the pickles that I got off that shelf. And they're like, oh yeah, high shelf pickles. Yeah, those are good. Right? And there are other problems that are real problems, like getting your hand inside of a vending machine when the pop didn't fully drop. Right? That's a lot easier with a child. So, right? Or another person of small stature. It's a moral quality. And therefore it is no more morally loaded to say that somebody is intelligent than it is to say that they're tall or more intelligent. That was my position then. And then gradually I decided, no, it was a moral quality.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But it's a moral quality exactly insofar as you take responsibility to facilitate your own self-development.
If God gives you free will, then you have the responsibility to act, or and that non-action is evil, or like it's not quite. I'm butchering the words there, but that there's something about that where it's like, if God gave you free will, that you have the responsibility then to act. But I think that there's something that more, I guess, that there's a piece that comes when you, to link it back around to like what we were talking about before, specifically when you have you've pursued this is just a personally relevant example, when you've pursued a certain career or a certain goal for an extended period of time, and then you lose that, it doesn't work out for whatever reason, and you're then trying to reassemble the pieces into a new career path or a new direction. The first piece of it is like this sort of imaginative play space that then kind of captures that spark. But then there's this other piece that comes in afterwards, which is the ownership of strength, but also the ownership of your experiences, given the fact that you have now watched, you can see around you other authorities dying. You can see the limits of their own experiences and the truths that they are putting forward with such confidence. So you see their limitations, you know that that's going to happen to you, but you still, in the face of that, have to pick up the experience that you have and the strength that you have, and to put those forward with the sense of like responsibility to the world or confidence, knowing that that death is coming down the line. But it's
Right.
like it, yeah.
Right. So it's like the old expression, the expression, every generation thinks they've discovered sex.
Yeah.
Right.
I've never heard that expression, but that's funny.
Every generation thinks they've discovered sex. But the flip side of that, which is maybe a little bit, it's a little bit like it's a little bit more autumnal in tone, is, oh my God, we have to rediscover sex every generation.
Yeah.
When you think about it that way, right? And we're a culture that has we've got a lot sunk in to the principle of cumulative knowledge, right? It's part of the whole, left, right, during the Cold War, the US, the Soviets, everybody, they may have differed in a bunch of ways ideologically, but everybody still clutches for the most part onto one piece of unexamined mythological axiom, the myth of progress. And the myth of progress requires cumulative knowledge. But you get to a point where you realize how much is actually slipping through all the time.
Yeah.
How much is getting lost, how much is getting forgotten. You rediscover enough things, right? Where you're like, oh shit, everybody already thought about this. And like, they didn't just think about it, they wrote it down. I have this book, oh God damn it. Or you start hitting on things and you're like, okay, this is somewhere between like the slightly ego-driven narcissistic concept of legacy, my legacy.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like, of the two forms of immortality currently open to us, biological. So I'll be alive, well, in them.
Yeah.
But like, will I be alive? No, you'll be dead.
Yeah.
But your genes will be alive, and good for them.
Good for them, yeah.
Right? And the immortality of having, your head in bronze on someone's mantle, and a lovingly annotated book full of things, but I'll still be dead, right? Maybe not. Maybe every time we open up Plato, his works still haunt those people, trapped hellishly in a state between life and death every time he's read. We don't really know, because we don't know how consciousness works. So, and let's hope that that's not true for his sake, because I'm going to read him again many times for thousands of years. For
every author's sake, that's not the case.
Yeah. Oh God, I've done a lot of writing.
I'm sorry, Anderson. You're going to
yeah. Crap. Yeah, it was only in the 32nd century that people finally realized how much psychic destruction literacy had enacted. Socrates was right all along. We never should have done it. It almost destroyed us. Anyway, hopefully not. But that sort of myth of progress piece, right, powers so much of this stuff. And fundamentally speaking, that's a kind of shared myth, and it has to do with this cumulative aspect. But also, right, when people are, I guess what I'm saying is the moral thing that I see is, if you want to shorthand it, we have a duty to make something of ourselves. Right? And of course, if one is not feeling especially pro-social, then the inclination may be to say, like, I don't feel like making something of myself, because fuck everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Fuck everybody, and fuck the horse they rode in on, and fuck the magistrate I'm currently talking to, right?
Yeah.
But of course, you don't have to turn yourself into something that serves that system. If we did that, we would have crystallized in Mesopotamia and never changed. So that can't be the way, right? You can crystallize yourself as something else, not crystallize. That's the wrong word, because that implies, because if you're a rebel in your 20s, you're probably not in your 70s, or if you are, something has maybe gone wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, no, maybe that's not the right word.
Mm.
Anyway.
We're covering a broad spiral on this one. Sorry.
We
That's my fault for sure.
no. It's been a conversation that's been really interesting. Yeah, I think that you do. It's interesting that you talk about, yeah, like for someone who's antisocial, for example, or like even if you find yourself in a situation where you're sick or you're, yeah, you're just not capable of doing what you once were able to do. Again, looping it back around to imagination and play, like when you re-enter back into that space in a moment of when you are ill, you're able to you break up the forms in which your life used to take, and you're able to find kind of new light in there, new things that will grab your attention, and then constructing a new role, a way of engaging with your immediate community, whether that's just like your family, and a different vision of your future self. That like finding new ways of that external point, which is like this kind of difference between just like internal, more egocentric sort of imagination, but not really imagination. It's more like engaging in rhetoric. I don't know, inside your head. Anyway, but finding that
transjective
yeah.
imaginal rhetoric. That's the acronym there. Anyone? Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, engaging, finding that a new external point, and then building a role around that. That is the
transjective imaginal rhetoric externalization.
Tire. We just came up with a new term.
Woo!
I love it.
See, because that's really the thing that's rolling forward, where the rubber meets the road, kids. Needs to work in marketing.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, the breakdown of that, I mean, tire is fantastic, but if you can really get the full version of that to catch transjective
imaginal shit. What was the R?
Rhetoric.
Yeah. Transjective imaginal rhetorical externalization.
Yeah, there you go. Rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah. It doesn't. That's what you need tire for. But the long version is for your wonks, for your sales people, and for people to like whip out at a cocktail party and say fluidly after they practiced it in the mirror. Right? And everybody can say, but what is that? Well, it's funny you should ask.
It's funny you should ask.
It's funny you should ask. I have pamphlets in my jacket. And if you'd like to sign up for our workshop, that's only 5 easy installments of $999. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No worries. Yeah, just the way how you construct a new role for yourself, so that you can find a new way to fulfill that responsibility to make something of yourself. But I mean, like something that I've always found is like the words like responsibility and make something of yourself. That's one frame of it, but it's also the fact that when you're sick and not doing so well, that like, and every day is just miserable, that there is, when you can find that point again and a new way of being meaningful to the world, that takes whatever strengths you have left or still available to you and grows those, you find your brain can be a mess, your body can be a mess, and it kind of pulls you into alignment in a way that just pure willpower that's acting upon prior goals can do.
Sorry, expand on that. Talk about that a little bit. That's a big thing to say, and I don't disagree, but I pull that apart. So sorry.
So this just came from, so like, I guess, the world that I grew up in was very much one that was about goal setting, and the importance of bringing goal setting into the world of teenagers. And that was like one of my first projects that I worked on. And it's been like kind of the truth that was told to me, that like, yeah, SMART goals, all these things. So goal setting.
I've asked you this before, but why teenagers?
For me?
Yeah, for you.
Oh, for me personally, why teenagers? Well, it's just because like, I guess I made some interesting decisions when I was a teenager, when I had a vision of my future. Of
interesting decisions. Is that what we call this now? Yes, I was a bit of a wild child also.
I was a bit of a wild child.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, I started off very driven, focused, and I had a vision of my future that I had been building towards, and taking very strong steps towards. And then I got injured, and then I got sick. And then I got into a horrendous relationship, and some very bad things happened. And my life just took a complete turn. And then I was kind of like grasping at straws of what I was going to do when I was going into university, and like how I was still going to make something of myself. And I just kind of grabbed the first thing that I possibly could, like looking at, okay, what am I good at? This is what I'm going to do. And it led to a 4-year degree, which, like, I mean, there's merits in doing things for an extended period of time, and like, but what I didn't need at that moment.
Yeah, sorry, I'm contractually obligated here to say university is a valuable exercise. Consider the University of Toronto. Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Look, but seriously, I only went to university as an adult, as you know, and it wouldn't have worked for me if I had gone earlier. I think it would have been bad. I would have shit the bed. But having done it a bit later, it was great, and it's been very good to me. There are definitely things to get there. It's a weird universal next step.
It is. It's a very weird universal next step, and it's and now more than ever we have options that don't require it, like that are actually like, I mean, even when you just look at the landscape of coding, for example, like you can go and sign up for like a week-long course, and suddenly you've got a job for like where you're making $60,000 a year.
It's always been like that. It's always been like that.
Yeah.
My high school girlfriend's dad was a computer programmer. He unfortunately died while we were in high school. But he was a computer programmer, completely self-taught.
Yeah.
Completely self-taught. He was an enthusiast who got into computers. He had the weirdest typing style of anybody I've ever seen. I am a 2-finger typist, but he was like a 2-finger typist, but he did knuckle rolls.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like it. But he was a remarkable coder, did all this coding for Bell Canada and stuff. Same thing. My dad totally is not a programmer, but my father was self-taught, and he transitioned from being the head of psychiatry at the hospital to suddenly running IT, just switched into. So that kind of self-taught stuff, as far as I can tell, has always been true of coding.
Yeah. And so, like, I mean, so there's like this place where that university definitely holds, and like there are people who are also like, they are born for university, like they are like going into classes that's like teaching you how to think, and then like the world needs those people, but there's this other piece which is like, and you can go about it in a way that's not just sort of flailing, in a way that is not naive to the point of taking on excessive risk, which is like can potentially be an issue if you're just entering into the world and sort of being self-taught. There is a way of going about it that's like, just not being too risky. But anyway, this is the reason why I was so interested was I felt like young Christine went into a bunch of experiences that sort of were a little bit too much. and I've been trying to figure out a way to, what could I put in the hands of young Christine that she would have actually done, that wouldn't have taken away her, that would have worked for her, because I was quite strong-headed and quite stubborn. So, but it would have had to have been something that I wanted to do. It couldn't be something that I was forced to do, or that somebody else told me was a good idea. And it had to be something that I would enjoy, and that so that's like, but that would have helped me in this circumstance of trying to kind of chart my path forward. And that's been why I've been on this mission to sort of like solve that problem, I guess, for the past 10 years or more, 10 plus years. Yeah.
10 years. Yeah, I guess so.
It's been over 10 years now. But I didn't realize I was doing it for those 10 years. It was just recently that I was like, oh, wait a second. What have I been doing for the past decade of my life?
Funny how that works. That's how I became a therapist.
There you go.
I mean, in some ways, I did also get a mystical quest tasking by Superman in the solar sphere of Tippereth. But another thing that happened was that a friend of mine who was a lawyer who I was talking to at the time was like, people do this for a job, right? I was like, oh yeah, right. Because it turns out being a novelist pays really well. if you're Stephen King.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a quick suggestion here.
Mhm.
I have to go to the washroom. I'm willing to let the viewers know this. I too urinate. I have to go to the washroom very quickly. Here's what I'm going to suggest. I'm going to put the camera. No, I'm not actually going to cut the feed, but I'm going to say, why don't you go grab a glass of water too, or whatever.
That's perfect.
I'm going to hit the mute button, and then
Okay.
I'm just going to retrain on this.
Perfect.
So just gonna, for the time being, can I do this with my work? That's basically right.
That's perfect. I mean, it's a little off center, but that's
Yeah, sure. No, it's fine. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, great. I'll be back in a sec. Technical difficulties, please stand by. Do you want to grab a glass of water too?
Yeah, I will.
Okay. I'll see you in a sec.
Okay.
My friends who do editing are going to hate this. They're going to be like, what are you doing? You're breaking the cardinal rule of YouTube. I'm sure in some way. Don't have dead air with a single image and no sound. All right. How are you today, home viewer? Doing well, I hope. Provided that you're anywhere in the basic vicinity of Toronto. It's been a somewhat gray day, but now it seems to be getting sunny. It's nice out. It's been beautiful around the province. I will confess I broke down last week and bought a newer motorcycle. It is used. I bought a newer motorcycle. So I upgraded my motorcycle. I already had a PC 889, but I picked up a 2005 Honda Shadow Sabre 1100. Beautiful bike. A lot of custom modifications on it, quite a bit of chrome, etc. Very good. So I've been spending time out in the sunshine, and I hope you have been doing the same. Okay, so we're back. That was a quick word from our sponsor, Honda.
Nice. Yeah.
No, it's not our sponsor, although Honda, shout out if you want to give us money.
Sure.
I have no idea how that works, but I would take it. Okay, so anyway, and that's why next week we'll be delivering from the back of a Honda lawnmower. Anyway, okay, so I know that we discussed this in early embryonic terms as being something that we wanted to keep relatively time contained. But now we're almost 2 hours in, and we're just getting onto the part that I super want to hear you talk about, and which is the part where you talk about the work that you've been doing. Okay, so we sort of knock this stuff around, because I find that super interesting. I think other people will too. So here's what I'm going to propose. Let's keep going.
Okay. Yeah.
And my theory is this: somehow I go, every once in a while I check my YouTube channel, whatever, and I go and I look, and it's like, what's getting the attention? And it's always this like 4 hour long, this 4 hour long alchemy video part 1, where I never released part 2. That's like, that's what people watch. They watch this 4 hour long video. I mean, God bless you, people. God bless you, everyone. God and gods, goddesses, and all various supernatural entities, forces, and powers of providence and grace. Bless you, bless you, bless you, children. Send it to your friends. Bless you, old men. Send it to your friends. Bless you, family matron. Send it to your friends, and click the subscribe button. Okay. Anyway, so let's just keep going. Whatever, we can cut it up. We can cut it up if we have to. As I was saying right before you got back, I think my friends who do editing will tell me that I've committed some kind of fundamental sin by having a 2-minute long stretch with a fixed image and no sound.
But that's why people have the like skip forward button. So
right, yeah, it's within your power. It's within your power. You control the horizontal and the vertical, like the voice in the Outer Limits. All right. So tell me about this project.
Yeah. So I guess like the thing that we were talking about before was just goal setting, and that the fact that when you cue into the spirit of like play in that, that you can suddenly find yourself with that will completely align your body and your mind in a way that gives you more energy than you ever dreamed kind of possible, especially like if you're in a state of being like sick. So this all came up, and like that, if you just try and act on prior goals, that you will find in a very physical way that you just is not possible, leads towards death. It's like the living out of the myths that we were talking about in a very embodied sort of way. Right. So I guess like this idea kind of has been something that has a pattern that has kind of appeared at multiple times in my life. But yeah, I grew up underneath the philosophy, and the first project that I worked on was all surrounding just, bringing goal setting to teenagers. And
can you talk a little bit, I think people know what goal setting means, but what does goal setting mean when you say goal setting?
Yeah. So the project did have a little bit of an imaginative space, which is where you do like free writing, a piece of it that's free writing, where you will write about things like your ideal future, or the hell that would exist if you were to continue with all your bad habits. So there's some free writing that you do, but then based on that, then you go to this piece of just like goal setting, where you'll come up with 6 goals or 4 goals. And then you divide those up into sub goals. You create for yourself benchmarks that are like real kind of things that you'll achieve. Whether if like your
goal is a benchmark. Sorry, just I'm being interrupted.
No, please do. It's helpful, because this is an old space that
I know. I can tell in the way that you're going through something that is rote.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
You haven't talked about it in a while, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a thing. I have a handful of these where every once in a while I get somebody and they're like, hey, I heard blah blah blah, and I'm like, let me access that. So the year was 2002. Hold on. It's not quite that bad for you. Obviously, you're going through it smoothly. But what I'm wondering is like. Okay, so some of what you're talking about obviously fits into the kind of the self-authoring space, right? And that's narrative therapy techniques, right? They've been sort of combined and assembled to some extent by Jordan in sort of that formulation of things. And I know you were involved in that too. We won't get into that too much probably, but sorry, I shouldn't just say Jordan, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Right, and so that stuff. So some of it's in there. In terms of the like benchmarks, what I'm wondering is, so there's a technique that you see in shit, solution focused brief therapy. Anyway, it's called the magic wand technique you use, which is like, what I want you to imagine is tonight, while you're asleep, your fairy godmother twinkles her way in through your bedroom window. She doesn't disturb you, but everything is illuminated in bright blue, and she waves her magic wand over you. And when she does, the fairy sprinkles dew, and she brings the wish true that is like she resolves this problem that you come to therapy about. And when you wake up in the morning, right, there's no sign of magic sprinkles all over your pillow, but the problem is resolved. How would you know? How would you know that the problem is resolved? Right?
Okay. Yeah.
This is an interesting question because, of course, it uses the framing of the magic wand to do this thing that's like, leave aside all of your practical objections to how to get there. It's right. The answer is absurd magic. It's caused it to be. Okay. And you don't have specific knowledge, right? You didn't do it.
Yeah.
In this instance, what would it look like?
Yeah.
Right. See how it sidesteps all of this, like all the resistances that you might have to trying to procedurally work it out. Well, I could never resolve that problem because don't you understand? Like Tom is always getting about it, right? So it's like, no, the fairy godmother.
It's going into that third person speak again, or like totally. Getting somebody to externalize it. Yeah.
So when you're talking about benchmarks in this sense, what's a benchmark? Is this like I'm going to hit XYZ, amount of money per year, or it's like I'd like to buy a house by 32, or what are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's basically so what is it? They're called like KPIs as well, like key progress indicators.
KPI.
Yeah, those babies.
KPI.
Yeah, KPI. So I mean, it's like like if you were going to run a marathon, I'm
not though, but
if you
I shouldn't say that. I might, I don't know. I'm in a state of constant growth.
If one were to run a marathon, and then they were to set some KPIs for themselves or for benchmarks for themselves, then it might be like running 5 kilometers at a certain speed or something like that.
Okay. So it has the benefits like a flow goal, right? It has its specific, practicable. What's that framework?
Is that SMART goal? Like it's SMART. Specific, measurable, achievable.
Raw, repeatable, realistic.
But that feels like achievable. Anyway,
the fact that I don't know that's what it is. It realistic tells you a lot. P, timely.
Anyway, you can tell again. This is something that it's been.
Anyway, it's fine. It doesn't matter.
I clearly detached from this. Unfortunately, it has to be something that's reintegrated at some point.
That is it. So I totally understand. Like I said, there are big sections of my brain where if somebody calls on me to draw it, I'm like, you want me to call up that old thing? Sure, fine. Yes, I suppose I'm an expert there.
It's sad too, because you spend large chunks of your life doing this, and then you become the expert, and then you reach a moment where it's like, all right, need to distance for a second, but then you really wish you could still draw on that knowledge to the same detail, but
give it some time, and then it loops back around. Nothing is ever wasted.
There you go.
Anyway, okay, so but I didn't mean to derail. I was just like trying to get a sense of what specifically it meant in this context.
I like the magic wand thing though. I might use that later on because I like how that's framed. So
it's really best done as like in a shaggy dog form. That's my finding. Not everybody would necessarily agree. I know there are lots of therapists who would come at that with a very like brief. Imagine that your fairy godmother came to you in the night with a magic wand and she magically resolved your problem. You woke up the next day. How would you know that the problem was solved? That's like the rapid fire way to do it. I like a shaggy dog version because the person gets engrossed enough in trying to figure out what the hell you're talking about that you diffuse a bunch of their details. That can be very effective, right? If you can sort of do some reasonably interesting storytelling where they're like, where is this going? Right? But also they're like interested, right?
You keep enough of the storyline to keep them pulling forward.
And that point, what we just made, this is going to come back later to inform some of Christine's fascinating dust-based work.
There you go.
We'll come back to that.
So I guess, so that was the framework that I grew up in, but then I got, so I was trying my best to try and implement this in schools, and I found that people would, or teenagers, I mean, they would go through the motions, but and they would complete the assignment, but it didn't really it didn't have an impact. I mean, it had an impact on first year university students, because it does help people commit to the path that they have chosen. Which like is independent necessarily of like whether that's the path that they will be interested in longer scale, but that doesn't necessarily matter. Anyway, it does help people commit to the path that they're on, which has value for sure. But what I found with teenagers is that because of the hyper focus that we have right now on university, and there's an interesting stat where teenagers are no longer getting summer jobs. There's like been a wave of issues of like people hiring, for part-time employment and things like that. Like employers are actually having difficulty finding teenagers to do this. And one of the reasons that they've said is because, well, teenagers right now are so busy with their athletics and the volunteering that they need to do in order to get into like a good university. So it's like their focus on getting into university and all the requirements for it has sort of like ballooned to taking up more and more of their life, so that everything is sort of targeted towards this single goal. And what you're finding is that like anxiety and depression levels are just increasing in teenagers. And this is like that thing where you're focused on an old goal that doesn't necessarily suit yourself, that you're not really sure that it suits you. You haven't spent enough time sort of like experimenting around with real world things to get a better sense of yourself out in the world acting and like what that's like, that you're just hyper anxious about this thing that you're dumping all of your time into, and where somebody else is in control of whether or not you get in, like, and whether or not you succeed. And it's like,
as both a psychotherapist and an assistant professor and a former high school teacher and a tutor and an educational consultant, the amount of attachment and emphasis I see people put into their school is heartbreaking for me sometimes. Not that it's unimportant. Obviously it's important, right? For certain things and in certain ways, like it's not unimportant. But boy, when your main validation system is tied in with this relatively sort of historically arbitrary set of structures, and I get it, it's not totally historically arbitrary. I'm not saying that there's nothing to the concept of grades or that, any of that, that's not the case. But like, I don't know. I encounter a lot of students who, if they think that if they don't get an A on every paper, their food won't taste good anymore. Or like they're going to be forced to go live in a garbage dump or something. Right. Like it's really terrifying. And this can be tied with family structures. It's really emphasized and reinforced. And I don't share that because I'm a high school dropout who avoided school for years. Right. And so on and so forth. And when I came back in, it was precisely that. But I also didn't have a really job in high school. Did you have a job in high school?
I did. I coached. I coached. Yeah.
You coached for money in high school?
Oh yeah.
Basketball primarily or other stuff?
I mean, it was primarily basketball, but that was saved using that. Yeah.
You must be a really good jumper.
because you're very short, so you must get up.
No, that's not what I meant at all. You're not very short. How tall are you? You're not that short.
I'm actually the average height of a female.
So how is that very short? What are you talking about? I mean,
relative to athletes or relative to basketball. When you're on a basketball court, I'm very, very short. No, okay. You just
right. Yeah, I guess that is a thing that we associate with basketball, right? Height. Not invariably though. Aren't there some basketball players that are like small? Larry Bird.
There's definitely you develop other skills like the 3-point shooting ability or dribbling and stuff like that.
Distance and dribbling. Okay. If for anybody who didn't know, I am not what you would call like an accomplished master sportsman. But I always cheer when the team scores a hockey, so I think I'm good. But seriously, okay, so you basketball coach for money. How did that?
Basketball coach for money.
I know we don't want to go too far down this road either, but I am curious. How did that work? Like, how did you get that gig?
So it all started for me just, there was a guy that was coaching the University of Waterloo women's team. And I was like, well, that might be a team that I want to play on. And I wanted to find a way of just like getting closer with him. So then I asked to job shadow him one day,
Yeah.
just all with like the idea of like, yeah, I just want to like form a relationship with the coach. Because I
Side note,
figured,
kids, job shadowing. I keep saying kids. I don't know why. Job shadowing is a great idea. Go and
yep,
look and see. I had this idea for a YouTube channel years ago, which I never did, but it was put basically a GoPro on somebody for the day while they go to their
yeah,
job and have
yeah,
it record continuously.
yeah.
Then compress the whole thing. Don't remove anything, but just compress the speed so that the whole thing is like 5 minutes long. Look and see what they actually do for their day for 5 minutes. Do
Oh,
you
I know.
think that lawyers are standing in front of a court saying, "Aren't you lying? In fact, aren't you a liar?" No, they're just going through paperwork.
Yeah,
If you like
yeah,
paperwork, you'll love being a lawyer.
yeah.
Anyway, so that was the idea. Okay, so job shadowing, and then you just went, and it sort of went from there, like a position opened up. And
Job shadowing, and just because I don't know, I was tenacious, I guess, at that time. Like, yeah, so anytime there was an opportunity, I spotted, and then pretty soon,
the upside of stubborn.
yeah, exactly. The upside is stubborn, where if I spotted something, I mean, so then soon I was doing office work to help him out. And then I was running camps, and then I was creating camps. Yeah, and then other opportunities opened up where I was able, when I was like in grade 8, to scrimmage with university players. Like, it was just, and
Wow.
if it hadn't been for that, like first moment where I was just asked him to job shadow him, then none of these other things would have happened. So
It's funny how that works, huh?
it's just, and that's why, like, who is it? One of the gentlemen that I'm working with right now, for the project that I'm working on, he was quite concerned about the difference between, so the kids that are in his school system, they are incredible. Like, they're absolutely, it's stunning what they are capable of doing, and where their minds are set. Like, they've got very entrepreneurial spirits, and this is coming from individuals who weren't necessarily like you wouldn't say like biologically oriented, not like, like they weren't, it's not like their personality traits are necessarily, or like their life experiences or their family history or any of these things are cueing them towards entrepreneurship. It's
Right.
just, it's part of, it's a lot of credit that I give to the school system that they're embedded in, and that has helped
It's
them.
really succeeding in bringing that out of them, where
Exactly.
their background, their experiences, and maybe even how they had formed their personalities up until that point didn't have that same kind of like risk-taking agency and efficacy sort of built in. I think a lot of people are like that.
Yeah, totally. It helps you like relook at your experiences and the way how you've initially constructed your narrative, and rewriting the story of your life such that you are an entrepreneur, kind of.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And
Narrative therapy stuff. Yeah. Yep.
yeah, and that's only a piece of like what they do. Like, it's really incredible. Anyway, so he was quite concerned, as we're trying to take a piece of the course that they've, or like work that they've developed out into an external context in other high schools. He's quite concerned that they wouldn't, that it's just not possible. And I was just telling him like that the moment that I fell in love with kind of going my own path was like when I was in grade 8, and all it took was a single encounter with somebody that I respected and asking to job shadow them, and then suddenly I was on a route where, yeah, that was all it took. And then you just you start to yeah, anyway, you fall in love with that path. So
You know my story about Mike Persinger?
no.
This is not one. See, this is in the dusty box. This has been this is one of these, like, I don't talk about it much anymore. It's like sort of yesterday's news, or the news of several decades ago. Okay, so I'll give the ultra condensed version of this. When I was in high school, I was, as I said, a bit of a wild child, maybe even something of a ne'er-do-well, a brigand and a swordsman, and something of a connoisseur enthusiast of altered states. But I did not have a job in high school. My strong preference was to go to neither class nor work, but instead to go to the library. Seemed like a good thing to do with my time, or to hang out with friends or whatever. In any event, this meant that I often did not have money, and the intersection of being a connoisseur of altered states and not having money is a great deal of innovation. So, for instance, I can tell you that there is indeed a theoretically nominally drinkable beverage, which can be produced from an espresso maker by loading the cup up with ground nutmeg. And that does have state altering effects, but it tastes awful and it's highly unpleasant.
It's
not,
made of nutmeg, like high concentrations of
yeah,
nutmeg.
yep, nutmeg is mind altering. And so you definitely can have an experience of this kind. Yes, I will also say I never detected any substantial effect from smoked banana peels, but I got the process of removing the inside of the banana peel and then reducing it and decarbing it in an oven and scraping it and processing it in other ways. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. This is not where the story is supposed to go.
Yeah.
Where the story is supposed to go is one day I decided I was going to build a headset that electromagnetically induced altered states. So I did. And I built it into an old, got it around here someplace. I built it into an old purple Optimus Prime toy helmet that I had because it was like sort of robust, and I built this thing anyway. So I was playing with this thing, playing with it, and I was increasingly sort of running things where I was asking students at the school and friends of mine and stuff like, will you try this? Like, I want to sort of run some experiments. And as you're having these states, like put you in a dark space and put this thing on, and then we'll come in and see. And really interesting, really catching. I was like, there's something really here, you know? I'd had this idea. I'm not going to get into that too much. But then I was out for coffee and somebody was like, hey, have you read Maclean's this month? Good question asked with the teenager at coffee. Read Maclean's this month? This is the 90s. The internet was not big yet. So have you read Maclean's this month? And he's like, there's a guy on the cover of Maclean's who's doing something kind of like what you're doing. And I was like, really? So I went to the library the next day and got Maclean's. And indeed, it was a story about the God helmet. This is Dr. Michael Persinger up at Laurentian and work that he's doing. Now I understand, I understand there's been some replication questions around that, but in any event, at the time, Michael Persinger was getting a lot of attention for this electromagnetic solenoid thing that he did, where he stimulated the temporal lobe. And the theory is more extensive than that. It has to do with electromagnetism and like geomagnetic influence and so on. But the point is, he would put people in this thing, he would stimulate their brain, and they would experience visions. And so it got called the God helmet. And I was running a similar thing. So I went again to the library. I went to the library and got out a big fat phone book for, like, you know, the area around Laurentian, looked up this dude's number and called him up and left a message and said, hello, you know, I'm Anderson Todd. I'm calling to speak with Dr. Michael Persinger. You can call me back at such and yada yada number. Click. No email yet, right? And we had to screen all of our calls at my house because my father worked in mental health. So you were never allowed to pick up the phone. You had to wait for the thing to go through, and then you would get a message that was like, Anderson, I know you're there. Anderson, I know you're home. Pick up the phone, whatever. But I get this call back, and it's Dr. Persinger.
Wow.
So I pick it up, and we end up having a number of these conversations, hours long, where we would chat about what he was doing, what I was doing, how our respective things were working, theories that we had, and so on and so forth, right? Really cool.
Yeah, no kidding.
And towards the end, he says to me at one point, he's like, you know, I haven't even asked. I'm like, what university are you working at? And I froze. Right. So I was like, oh, here we go, moment of truth. I was like, well, actually, I'm not at a university. I'm a high school student.
Awesome.
And to his credit, he was so cool about it. He was like, oh, that's great. You know, that's really wonderful that you're taking that kind of initiative. You know, if you ever needed help getting any of this into publication, I'd be happy to help you. And stupidly, I never did that because my goal at the time was to monetize this thing so that I could, you know, retire at the age of 22 and start building my house on the moon. But anyway, so it didn't go that way. That's fine. My point being that interaction, I didn't really think about. I did go into that business for a while. I got out of it. I did a lot of other things. And it was only years later that I realized the extent to which that interaction had impacted me. That it played a huge role in lots of ways. Obviously, my interests were the same. But, you know, if I was forced to say what it is that I do, it probably a decent shorthand, right, for what I do at the university is neurotheology. Right? I've come not to like that term for various reasons, but it's pretty close. It's not that dissimilar, right? The interests are all the same, but also that reaching out to somebody and getting that kind of response and then having it play forward has been probably the single best thing that ever happened to sort of my career and my project life. And it sounds like you're in the same boat, right? It's that like reach out, get closer, volunteer, find your way into something because you're interested in it.
Yeah, totally. It's
Yeah.
like I do talk about like the pillars of my life that I've had, and they've been like
Yeah.
I know that there's been three very clear ones. That the first one was this gentleman that I worked with for basketball. The second one was Jordan. And then the third one is now the gentleman that I get to work with for this project that's with the high schools.
Mhm.
And yeah, but yeah, they're all from like, you come up with an idea that seems to resonate with somebody else, and then you carry that forward and kind of see where it goes.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to say two things here. We might actually end up having to cut this off because I know my husband walked in, and my place unfortunately is not set up. And I'm
Oh
also a
shit.
little bit scatterminded where like, as soon as I see him, I'm like, oh.
Hello.
Yeah, exactly. So my brain is not as focused. So we might have to do it. Well, I would really love to do a part two.
Let's do a part two. Part two of how many? We barely even
Yeah.
got started. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm operating on the assumption that it's fine. Look,
Okay.
we don't need boundaries. We don't need we don't need structure necessarily. We can just talk about stuff and we'll get there. That's in fact
Okay.
how this works, right? We don't have to have a debate or an anti-debate. Oh, which was what I was going to suggest. I'll leave you with that since your husband just came home, which was you
Yeah.
were like talking about fighting and perspective taking, etc. And it's
Yeah.
like the next time you have a
Yeah.
fight, try an anti-debate.
An anti-debate.
Mm-hmm.
Describe this.
Look it up. Look it up.
Okay, I'll
Anti-debate.
look it up. Okay, I'll
Google
look
it.
it up.
Anti-debate.
Okay.
Anti-debate is a movement. It's an interesting one. It's one that I'm looking forward to drawing on. Oh my God. And one of these conversations, I got to tell you about some of the crazy stuff I have. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I have to tell you about some of the pedagogically innovative material that I'm coming up with for this full year course that I'm doing. It clicks into this directly
I
because it's a
love it.
full year 400 level alchemy course
Oh,
that
is
I'm
this the one
teaching.
where you're teaching magic? I mean, you're not. You're not teaching magic. Oh no. It's much
Who
serious.
knows what could
Very
happen?
serious. I mean,
It's very serious, respectable. We're in the top 20 academic institutions in the world. Very serious. Um, anyway, I'm gonna get fired. All right, but part of it is
again,
alchemy.
we support university.
I know. Yeah.
We
Hooray! Thank you. Hooray! I do actually. It's a very cool place to teach sometimes.
Yeah.
The future of education is TikTok. Who are we kidding? So, what I was going to say is it, of course, insofar as it's depth psychology and alchemy, right? Yes, we're going to go through a history of alchemy, and we're going to look at sort of more traditional Jungian takes on depth psychology and alchemy, but also it will be intimately concerned with the general arts of transformation, and most importantly of self-transformation. So including assignments where you're going to pick a thing over the course of the year and transform it.
Yeah.
But also I got to talk to you about some of this other stuff because you should sign up. We're going to take a trip to a dark room, do our own photography, a vineyard, I think. I'm gonna go on anyway. We'll talk about it. Okay, so anti-debate. Look it up. It's very cool.
Okay.
We're gonna do some anti-debate too. So okay, let's put a pin in this here. What's your day like tomorrow?
Yeah, let's do it tomorrow. I mean, we could in the afternoon,
Sure.
like at noon, 1 o'clock again.
Yeah, I think that works for me.
Okay. I mean,
I think that works for me. I'll double check. I'm on vacation all month.
Yeah, I would love to
So-
pick this up right like again tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then I guess maybe just to like sum up, just to like put a pin in, we were talking about this idea of like the acting on prior goals.
Yeah.
And then how that like you reach a point where it can just kind of you in a very physical way sort of guide you towards death if you're still trying to act on those things when things have fundamentally changed. But this idea that perhaps this is like a context in which what the current landscape is in with high school students and teenagers, that something else is required in order to help them kind of chart their path forward, that we've done the goal setting thing, we've got that. And that we just need a little bit of like a counter force not dropping goal setting completely, but there's a space for it. And, just
Sure.
adding a bit more nuance to that and the ways, I guess, how I've just started to go about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then eventually we will transition to you talking about your dust stuff without giving away your secret sauce or any other trade secrets, right?
Yes, exactly.
No problem. Because I want to hear about that stuff, and especially because I think it's almost inevitable that as any conversation proceeds, it asymptotically approaches the odds that we're going to talk about D&D. So,
Yeah.
so as it should be.
As it should be.
As it should be, as it should be under the watchful eye of Moloch. There really are some people who are going to be pissed about that, probably. But anyway, it's a Dungeons and Dragons things, folks. It's not actually Moloch. It's not actually Moloch. Okay. So we'll pick this up tomorrow, but let's pick up a play. We'll talk about that stuff and the goal setting stuff, because I think there's something interesting here. And I think it actually plugs in towards a little bit the stuff we were just talking about. Yeah. There was a moment of very positive reinforcement that we had, and some of that's clearly part of our personality and upbringing in some ways, but reaching towards the world and being met. Yeah. Being a success in doing so, right? And this is something which is both options that are apparent to people are comparatively narrow. Like that's the everybody goes to school and people see the world in relatively narrow terms, etc. But then also there is a caution, a trepidation, right? A sort of learned helplessness that's built in, that is the part of our mind that lets us off the emotional hook by being like, if you don't play, you can never lose. Yeah. Right? So, but so a lot of the stuff you're doing is more sophisticated than that. I want to talk about it, and I want to talk about dust. So I'll process this one. We'll take a look and decide whether or not we look like crazy people, and then we'll pick it up tomorrow.
That sounds really good.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. In the meanwhile, I hope you have a lovely day. Get out into the sunshine, and we'll chat back and forth. But provisionally, we'll pick this up tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Okay. Sounds good. Okay.
Deep in the mountains primeval of the Himalayas, generations of the Nepalese people have worked in teams to ascend the cliffs of the Himalayas in order to gather a very special form of treasure: Nepalese mad honey. I've often said that I'm something of a connoisseur of altered states, and so it's a rare treat when I get to try something that is truly novel. This was imported at considerable expense. As you can see, I've done a very nice job indeed. And there we are, 100% pure mad honey with a delightful little, what does one call these? Honey dipper? Honey wand? I don't know. Oh. Okay, there we go. Ooh, it has a strong odor. Decidedly floral, but maybe on the very edge of sort of medicinal. Okay, so the instruction on mad honey, one definitely does not want to partake in excess. So my impression is that one is supposed to have at any given time only 1 teaspoon and no more than 2 teaspoons a day. I'm going to stir it up with the honey wand. And here it goes. I'll wager that's about a teaspoon there. And so the time, my trusty assistant. What time is it? 10:24
p.m.
p.m. Here we go. Let's see what happens. Mmm. This is delicious. Oh.
It has a very slight medicinal quality.
It has a slight medicinal quality. And a very slight, like, tingly, numbing quality to it. A slight anesthetic quality. Not nearly as strong as something like Kava Kava, but just noticeable. It's a noticeable tingle. I am sorely tempted to eat more of this. I won't, because that's a good way to poison yourself. Mad honey. And nobody needs to see me running through the streets, naked, screaming, with a mouth of half-chewed bees. That's delicious. Don't want to mistake this for regular honey.